The law will never be enough. Even the law given after grace, even the law given only for relationship purposes, will never live up to it. Never. And therefore, unless there's some way of paying for our sin, unless there's some way of atoning for our failures to obey the law, we are not going to be able to stay in a relationship with a holy God. Hi, this is Discovering the Gospel in Every Book of the Bible. And today we're going to look briefly, concisely, I hope, as we always have been, at the book of Exodus. And each time we're going to be looking at the question, how does this book of the Bible move the storyline of the entire Bible along? Secondly, how does it give us some of the principles of the gospel of grace? And thirdly, how does it show us Jesus? So first of all, how does it move the storyline along? And as we've talked, we say that the storyline of the Bible is creation, fall, redemption, and then restoration. But redemption is a very long chapter. And the redemption has a number of subchapters. And at first, God redeems through a family, the family of Abraham, which is what we saw in Genesis. But then in the book of Exodus, he moves that family into becoming a nation. And so the storyline moves along because in the book of Exodus, we see a family, the children of Abraham, and they still are a family in that sense, but they've gotten so large that they are to become a nation state, a culture, a nation with laws. And so that's a major way in which Exodus moves the storyline along. It's also true that for the first time we get the tabernacle, the temple, the sacrifices. And that, as we will see here in 1 second, also moves the storyline along because what God is doing here with the children, this family, the children of Israel, is he's not only giving them his law, but he's also showing them that the law won't be enough. So that moves us into principle, okay? The principle of the gospel is that we're saved by grace alone, but that grace always changes the life. So we're not saved by living a good life in any way, and yet once we grab that grace by faith, it changes our life. That's the gospel. And we see that here. And actually it's spelled out in such great ways. First of all, here's the most obvious question about Exodus. Does God give them the law first and say to Israel, now if you obey the law, I'll save you from slavery and bring you out of Egypt? Does he say, here's the law, and if you obey it, I'll bring you out? No. He says, I'll bring you out, and then he gives them the law. So you see, the first 19 chapters of the book of Exodus is God bringing them out, saving them, even though he hasn't even given them the law. And in many, many, many ways, they show themselves grumblers and unhappy and not at all admirable people. So what we have is right out of the gate here in the book of Exodus, the principle of grace. God saves you by grace, then changes your life. Not, well, if you change your life and you pull yourself together, then maybe I'll save you. So other religions, you pull yourself together, then I'll save you. Christianity, I'll save you, and then we will renovate your life. And that's very important. The second thing that's most interesting is he brings the people of Israel out and then gives them the law. But the law makes them a people. And in fact, God says over and over in Exodus, I'm going to give you my law so you will be my people and I will be your God. That's relational. That's relational. If you may not know me a bit, but if you heard me say something like my Kathy, and you didn't know my wife was Kathy, you might assume that that's probably who I'm talking about, because to call someone my Kathy is the language of intimacy. And so here's God saying, I'm going to be in an intimate personal relationship with you. Not only will you be my people, but I will be your God. And what is the purpose of the law then? The purpose of the law is not to save us, but the purpose of the law is not to rack up merit points. The purpose of the law is to have a relationship. The law shows us that this is the kind of God we have. Don't kill, don't steal, don't commit adultery. Why? Because the God you have a relationship with, if we're going to have a relationship, is a God of honesty, is a God of caring, is a God of love. And therefore, it's extraordinarily important for you to see that the role of God's moral law is there for relationship. That's radical. It's just completely radical. So the idea that grace comes first, then obedience, rather than the other way around, and the idea that also it's very important that you see that the law is there, we must obey it, but we obey it in order to have a relationship with God. Those are very, very important things that you only see in the book of Exodus. But the last thing, and this brings us to Jesus, is this. God doesn't just give them the law. He also gives them the tabernacle and the sacrifices. And actually, if you're going to divide Exodus into 3 parts, as I would, the first few chapters are God bringing the people out. Then the middle chapters are the law, and the last chapters are the tabernacle. And why would God say you're going to have priests, and you're going to have to have sacrifices, and you're going to have to be offering those sacrifices to atone for sin? Why doesn't he just give them the law? What's with all the sacrifices? And the answer is, this is pointing forward, that the law will never be enough. Even the law given after grace, even the law given only for relationship purposes, will never live up to it. Never. And therefore, unless there's some way of paying for our sin, unless there's some way of atoning for our failures to obey the law, we are not going to be able to stay in a relationship with a holy God. We cannot be in a relationship with a holy God, and of course now we're going to be talking about Leviticus later on, but you cannot be in a relationship with a holy God unless someone atones for your failures to obey the law, which should be the basis for your relationship. And of course, what that means is here we're looking at Jesus. And especially in this way, the original act of deliverance was the Passover. God sent the angel of death into the Egypt to kill, to destroy. And he said, however, if you kill a lamb and you spread the blood on the doorposts, then the angel of death will pass over you. And of course, Jesus Christ actually has literally said that his Lord's Supper is a Passover sacrifice. And Paul has literally said he's the Passover sacrifice. He is the Lamb of God. All these other lambs that were slaughtered in Passover over the years, they can't atone for sin, but Jesus Christ is the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. It's by the way, it's intriguing. I'm just tell you a quick story to end. Yep, I can do that. Charles Spurgeon was a great Baptist preacher, and in the 19th century in London, and he was going to preach at a great big auditorium, and not just an auditorium, but almost a palace. And he was in there testing out. This is in the days before there was a PA system or amplification. So he was testing out the acoustics. And he went there, and there was nobody else. As far as he knew, there was no one else there. No one else there. But what he did was he decided to test the acoustics by calling out, "Behold the Lamb of God who taketh away the sin of the world," which is, of course, what John the Baptist said about Jesus. "Behold the Lamb of God that taketh away the sin of the world." And there was actually a workman way high up in the rafters that Spurgeon didn't know about, who didn't go to church, wasn't a Christian, and when he heard that voice coming through, he came under very great conviction. He says, "What does that mean?" Something happened in his heart, and he went and studied it and became a Christian. Later on, came back when he realized it was Spurgeon's voice that he'd heard. It's not little woolly bipeds that can take away the sin of the world. Those Passover lambs point to Jesus, the great Passover lamb. The book of Exodus shows us the gospel of Jesus Christ.